So, just as you are doing it, great to see you all on the chat. It is honestly fab to see people from all over the place. We've got literally over 1,000 people registered for tonight's webinar, so a pretty big audience on there. And I'm quite excited because I don't use Airway Suction very often now. And so I'm quite looking forward to a good refresher tonight. And of course, it's the fabulous Jamie who will be presenting that for us all.
Thanks, Andy. Need to get some factor 50 on for them bright lights.
I'm going to change the skin tone in a second, so if I can give myself like a 2-week Tenerife look. Just hopefully not like Mad Joff Benidorm.
Stay under them lights, that's what you look like.
Paul, who's a nurse from Essex. Good evening, Paul. Great to have you on board. Hey, Andrew. Glad to be back in class. Yomi, I'm glad to be back here, but they've brought me some big bright lights. It's a bit like New York in here tonight. Ipswich, Colin. Evening. Caroline from Pembrokeshire. Daz from Wakefield. Oh, gosh, it's moving too quick now. Sarah, who's a TAPP from Somerset. Oh, gosh, lots of people now. Andy, it's Dan from Blackburn. Very close to me, Dan. Very close, in fact. You could have come and done this for me tonight, then I could have had my tea without rushing it. Me and poor James had to rush his tea tonight. We'll be scampering around for Gaviscon at 9 o'clock.
I've reached that age now.
Well, I'm not quite there yet, but I'll go with that. Maybe you've got a good moisturiser, Jamie. That's all I can say. Or maybe you need to get some of this good lighting. That's what you need. Takes 10 years off you.
It's not doing any favours, mate.
Anyway, moving straight on.
So, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to our latest monthly webinar for sort of pre-hospital subjects, ideally. And if you've got any questions this evening, then feel free to put them into the question and answer box. There's one in there for you, Andy. I'll leave you to deal with that one about an account problem. Try and put them in there, not into the chat, because they disappear into the chat as it scrolls up the screen. So pop them in the question and answer, and we'll get back to them towards the end. So where are we? Pre-hospital airway suction. Do we really suck at it? Yeah, and that's the subject we're going to cover this evening. And something that we spend quite a lot of time talking about delivering our difficult airway courses, EMS. Shameless plug there, I know. So here we go. Let's make this thing scroll on. So what's the issue? What is the issue with pre-hospital airway suction? I think there's a number of issues. How did we learn to suction? Because we can be taught how to use a suction machine, but traditionally there was no real way to learn how to do suction unless you happen to do it on a hospital placement, if that was part of your training, or the time you learned suction was the first time you went to a patient whose airway was full of stuff. And then that's not really a good time to learn. So education is a real thing. How do we learn to do a skill when there was no way to teach that skill? There's a lot of dogma in publications, so we're going to review that and where some of this stuff comes from. And obviously one of our missions in life is to remove dogma out of pre-hospital care. I think that might be a lifelong mission, but we can only try. There's a lot of dogma in education that comes from those publications and things that have been taught forever, and no one really challenges them. Neonates, but we shouldn't then transition that over into all suctioning. Because if you say only suction for 10 seconds, then what happens when you get to the end of 10 seconds and the airway is still occluded? You just stop and let the patient have an occluded airway. So why say it in the first place? I think definitely the mantra of suction until the airway is clear. Because you can't stop after 10 seconds and then re-oxygenate if you're oxygenating in some way if the airway is not clear. So it really is something else about suction that really makes no sense and yet continues to be taught in this sort of dogmatic approach. And then suction equipment. Sadly, often suction equipment is, like many things in the ambulance world, ordered and bought by someone without a clinical perspective. So they don't know what the item is. They don't know what it does. They're told to buy items. They buy items, and they may buy different ones of it, and they really don't know what the thing is for or what it's being used for. And I think that's really important that we have good clinical input into how money is spent on equipment that goes into ambulances, because there's a lot of stuff in there we really don't need, and then some other stuff we do need that isn't in there. Yeah, we often have these devices floating around, various different types. There's multiple different types of these sort of handheld suction devices. The sort like this and some of the Telegraph ones and whatever were famous for putting them in the bag, and then when you wanted to get them out the bag, they were in 100 pieces, like some sort of suction jigsaw. You had to figure out how to put them back together to make them work, and then they didn't work anyway. Or you see the sort of turkey baster type ones that work a little bit, but fill up very quickly and lose suction very quickly. As a whole, we describe handheld suction, unless you're work in a setting where you can't carry anything else, yeah, then we describe this sort of suction as homeopathic. Yeah, it's there to make the medic feel better because you're carrying some suction rather than of being any clinical use to the patient. Yeah, it's in a bag, you feel comfortable, I've got suction. Yeah, whereas in reality, you know, unless it's an austere setting or something where you can't carry an electric powered suction unit and it's the best you've got, you know, they're sized in French gauge. Yeah, if you look at them. Yeah, French gauge comes from a guy called Charrier, who was a Swiss guy. He invented the sizing system for cylindrical medical devices, hence the abbreviation CH. Yeah, so you see it as the Swiss gauge size as CH for Charrier. Yeah, but English speakers struggle with the word Charrier, and so they then it got translated to French gauge. Sometimes you see it titled as FR, yeah, for French gauge. Though really it should be CH. And it's become fairly universal to call it French gauge, even though he was Swiss. Yeah, but I guess from the French-speaking end of Switzerland, the west end of Switzerland, the Geneva end. So it became commonly known as that. So yeah, Charrier, single Charrier, yeah, is 0.3 mils and refers to the outer diameter. So usually things that are sized in French gauge refer to the outer diameter of the device, which is quite important because we have to understand when we're trying to use medical devices together, what is the inner diameter of one and the outer diameter of another, so that they'll fit together. Yeah, unlike cannulas, which are sized in gauge, which is a wire size invented by engineers for selling bits of steel wire. So a lot of medical stuff is quite weird. Yeah, so a Charrier 0.3 mils refers to the outer diameter, not the inner one. Things like ET tubes, the general size we see like 6, 7, 8 mil is the inner diameter and is usually sized in millimeters. And we know that something sized in CH in French gauge is the outer diameter. So it tells us which ones will fit together. Yeah, so as a good example, it means we can fit a 6 millimeter ET tube, 6 millimeters on the inside, over an adult bougie, because an adult bougie is 15 French gauge or 5 millimeters. So having two different sizing systems actually is quite important because it means we know what device will fit over what device. And a top tip we picked up from Twitter from my esteemed probably the tubing alone may enable you to grab the thing using suction, particularly soft sort of fruit type things. But we should practice laryngoscopy and McGill's in peds for choking, because although most places have taken away pediatric intubation due to the lack of exposure, we really should keep up our sort of pediatric laryngoscopy skills, because obviously foreign body airway obstruction is way more common.